Hey everybody, happy remote day. So hopefully you're getting up at this point or you're already awake and you've been waiting for my lecture, and that's the downside of hybrid is that I've got to record multiple lectures on one day. So yeah, so hopefully you guys haven't been waiting too long for this, but I'm just getting it recorded now. So today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to be wrapping up Chapter 4, Section 1. And remember, we're talking about the socialization process, this lifelong process of learning to participate in a group, which really starts at birth and it goes throughout your entire life. And it's incredibly important because the four major agents of socialization, whether it's your family, your friends, the media, or schools, they're teaching you how to participate in our society, what our society's norms are, what's right from wrong, how to basically fit in, so to speak. And the last slide that I was talking about on Monday and Tuesday was I was talking about how a person's personality, for a long time, sociologists and psychologists really fought with each other and they kind of debated, was it nature that really kind of impacted someone's personality? Meaning, was it heredity? Was it their genes? Was there a biological basis for their behavior? Had they inherited certain aptitudes, certain traits from their parents? And as you're reading page 89 and doing questions 1 and 2 for class, hybrid, it's got it due Thursday. For group A, group B's got it due Friday for in class. Have those assignments done when you come to class, and then the remote learners just get them done by midnight of Friday. And the twin study kind of shows that, yeah, there is this, even with twins separated at birth, there are these just uncanny connections with how they act and their interests and how they behave, which really kind of leads credence to the sociobiologists out there who say, look, you're born with all these things, that a baby has instincts and drives and reflexes, and the twin studies really just show how important nature is. But for a long time, there was also, these other people out there who believed in nurture, who believed in the environment. And do I have a typo there? No, I guess I don't. I thought I did. But the nurture side of things really believes that, it's all about the environment that you're raised in, that you can take a poor kid and stick him in a very wealthy household. And even if he has learning disabilities, even, if he does not have an aptitude for a musical instrument or a sport, with the best tutors, with the best coaches, with practice, with love, that you can shape and that you can mold someone. And it's really about the environment. So today's lectures, we're really going to focus about the nurture side of things. And we're going to talk about, how environment impacts you. Now, remember, most sociologists, psychologists, scientists believe today that who you are and your personality is this combination of nature and nurture. But for a long time, there was this thought that it had to be one or the other. And today we're going to really focus on the nurture side. So we've got some notes here, maybe, if I can get it to go forward. There we go. And the first thing we need to talk about is this very famous experiment by a psychologist by the name of Harry Harlow. So as you're going through this class, I'm hoping that you're thinking it's interesting, that if you go on to college, it might be one of the electives that you take. And if you like sociology, I think you'll like psychology as well. I love psychology. It was one of the things that it's actually part of like my minor in college. I spent years studying it, so I can teach that as well. I just wish the school offered it. But Harry Harlow was this really interesting man. And he said, well, what happens, if people are socially isolated? How does it impact their behavior? How does it impact their desires in life? Will they ever be able to adapt and fit in? And of course, when it comes to doing experiments, if you think back to the first unit of the year, we talked about, experiments and how they work and how there's this ASA code of ethics, and the American Sociological Association says that conducting an experiment, it has to be ethical. You have to provide people with informed consent. You can't really deceive them unless it's deemed absolutely necessary. And so doing an experiment where you would purposely isolate kids from their parents and mistreat them is wrong. Okay, there's no question about it. It's physical and emotional abuse. So that was not deemed, okay by any means, even years ago when there was some really shady stuff going on. And we will talk about some of the shady experiments that happened. And as you're reading that twin study, you might realize how shady it was that they were kind of separated and never knew about each other. But people got away with that stuff back then, more so than, of course, today. So instead of trying to see what the effects of isolation are on children, he tested out on monkeys. And you might still be thinking, well, this is still pretty cruel. And yes, it definitely is, but there's no other way I can tell it to you, but experiments are done on animals all the time, whether you think that's right or not. It's just kind of how the world works, unfortunately. So he's going to basically try to figure out, how does isolation impact monkeys? And in this very exciting kind of experiment, he's going to basically set it up and say, okay, if a monkey is hungry, would it rather choose, if it got to choose, and you take a monkey and you've taken it away from its mom, its dad, all of its relatives, its family, it's isolated, it's alone, would it rather choose basically a monkey that has comfort, okay, that's like wrapped in basically like you can see it in the below picture there. It looks like a sponge almost to me. They describe it as like a terry cloth kind of a towel, and it's got freaky eyes, I think. I think they look creepy, but apparently the monkey doesn't think so. Or would it choose this wire monkey that has no comfort, is hard, it's like made out of wire mesh. You can see it, it looks like chicken wire to me, but it has food. Which one would the monkey choose? And so think for a second, which one do you think it would choose? Would it choose the food monkey, or would it choose the comforting monkey? If you're hungry right now, you might be thinking the food monkey. And what you're going to come to find out is that pretty much the monkey always chooses the terry cloth mother. It wants the comfort, it wants the affection, it wants the love. It really doesn't want the food. Now, if it's absolutely starving, what we saw would happen was that during different trials during this study, the monkey would go to the monkey that was like the wire one with food. It would go get the food very quickly, and then it would go back to basically snuggle this terry cloth monkey, which of course wasn't real, you saw from the images. And this is what you're going to be reading about. There's our bells. They haven't turned off our bells today. That's what you're going to be reading about in the Harlow experiment. And so it's interesting that, the monkeys clearly crave contact, of other monkeys, some kind of comfort, some kind of physical intimacy, that they're, only taking food when it's absolutely necessary, and how important that really is to them. And especially if they were scared during one of the trials, they scared the monkey with loud sounds and creepy kind of music, and just to kind of see how it would react, and naturally it goes to the terry cloth mother. If the only one in the cage, so they also did another part of the experiment, and you can read about this all in the Harlow experiment assignment that I posted under classwork. If they only have the monkey in the corner that is like the not soft one, the one that has the milk, usually the monkey would just stay by itself in the corner and self-isolate. So it would rather be alone than go to that hard mesh monkey that they realized was not a real person and was just a food source. So what we're getting at is they always want the comfort. They always want the love and affection, especially if they're scared. And if that's not available, they would almost rather be alone. And, they only get food when absolutely necessary. Now, obviously, this is monkeys. This isn't people. But Harlow's study has been applied to humans. And what they've basically thought of is, clearly baby monkeys, these baby rhesus monkeys, they need warmth and affection and comfort and love. And, babies need that as well. And so clearly there is this, emotional connection here, from that physical touch and that intimacy and that showing of love and safety. It's just so important to a baby early on, throughout that first year, but it's also really important to the monkey. Now, in a later study, Harlow went ahead with the monkeys and he continued to isolate them for longer and longer and longer periods of time, and he saw that bad things happened. When the monkeys were finally let out of isolation, they would attack others, being physically abusive, including even attacking their own, trying to eat their own, trying to kill their own. That they really went into a super survival mode, and they lacked social skills, and they really couldn't socialize and fit in. And so yet again, that final step has really been added, and it's made people question and say, well, what happens to children who've been physically abused or who've been emotionally abused? Is that perhaps why they struggle with creating their own relationships? Is that perhaps why they go on to abuse others physically, emotionally, sexually? Is that why, they struggle to be developed, and to socialize and to kind of fit into our societal norms? And so that's what a lot of psychologists study, is kind of that underlining role that family and those human relationships play early on. And that, of course, goes very Freudian kind of psychology, but really and truly, there is this thought that family is the most important agent of your socialization process, whether you like them or not. But whoever you grew up with, it doesn't matter if they gave you your DNA or not, but whoever you grew up with, they really have impacted you and imprinted on you and really, led to a huge role of your personality, which is why, people who thought that your personality and your development was all about nurture, he really kind of helped add to that. So what you're going to be doing in this assignment is you're going to be writing at least 5 sentences or more talking about, what new parents should do to raise a baby, and be thinking about Harlow's experiment when you're writing your 5 sentences in that Google Doc. So I know there's pictures. I'm going to hit pause here because the minute music's coming on. All right, I'm back. For some reason, they still have the bells on. I guess that's a thing on Wednesdays, and minute music, so that's interesting. So what you're doing in this Harlow experiment is, I know there's like pictures and stuff. In the past, we of course, did this assignment in class, and it took a whole 5 minutes, and you just circled what was happening in each phase of the experiment. You don't need to do any of that. You're just going to read through the different parts of the experiment, which I kind of just explained during lecture. And then in the attached Google Doc, you're going to write the short paragraph of at least 5 sentences talking about how new parents, kind of a child development kind of assignment, how new parents should treat their children, and thinking back to Harlow's studies and kind of referencing the different things that we talked about in terms of the importance of human love and physical contact, and not, physically, emotionally abusing anyone. Now, yet again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about on Monday and Tuesday, when we talked about, what a baby needs from the moment it's born in terms of material comforts versus non-material comforts. And I hope you're understanding that when it comes to, the material comforts, yes, if a child doesn't actually have food or shelter or isn't watched properly, it could die. We're talking about, detrimental physical abuse immediately. But in the long term, if a child does not receive any kind of stimulation or love or physical contact in terms of those non-material comforts, and especially like children in orphanages may not receive some of those things, especially if they're overcrowded or they lack funding or lack staff members who care, you could be seeing long-term impacts on their personality where they're never able to physically, emotionally, socially develop and fit into our society, which is what we're going to talk about here now. Now, what we see as well is that Renee Spitz ends up doing a study about an orphanage. And he's studying overseas basically what life is like in some of these orphanages. And they're incredibly overcrowded to the point that there's too many kids, there's not enough staff numbers, there's not enough funding. And so what ends up happening is that these poor infants are basically left in a crib all day long, like for hours a day. Like nobody ever picks them up and holds them or rocks them or talks to them or plays with them or loves them. I mean, they're given a bottle and they're fed, but that's it. So we're talking about they spend the whole time on their backs, and that's it from the moment they're born. And when they cry for a long time, which isn't good because a baby cries because it's obviously signaling to you that it needs something, that it's wet, that it's tired, that it needs to be changed, it needs to go to sleep, something of that nature. And so the baby is, sending you a message. And they would eventually feed the baby, change the baby, put the baby down for a nap, but that's it. There's no hugging and snuggling and reading stories and singing songs and any kind of mobiles over cribs to kind of have any kind of stimulation. There's no teddy bears, there's no blankies, there's nothing. And so if you're wondering what happened to these kids, it's yet again another sad story that Spitz kind of documents here. And he documents that after 2 years, 15 of these babies had died. And that's interesting because technically they had their physical needs met. I mean, they were being fed and they were being, changed, and they had sleep. And so what they basically assume is that, can you die from lack of love? Can you die from a broken heart? Not technically, but they really were wondering what was basically killing these babies' will to live. It's something that they consider failure to thrive, failure to grow and to develop, and what was causing that. And they believed it really was because of the lack of, emotional support or connection or physical human contact. They talk about that, doctors do, from the moment that a baby is born, the importance of that physical contact, of that skin-to-skin contact. And we know that basically 9 of the babies end up being removed from the institution, and those babies end up thriving in comparison to the rest of the babies in the institution. So the 9 that get adopted, they end up thriving, living a normal life, compared to the ones that end up in the institution, the orphanage for the next several years. Many of them end up being mentally retarded. But yet again, you can't just say, oh, these kids, stayed in an orphanage, and so now they're mentally retarded, because of lack of love. It's not as simple as that. Even though there is correlation there, you can't, necessarily say that that's causation. You can't say lack of love means mental retardation by any means. There is a connection there, or a correlation. Remember, we talked about this in the first chapter about the importance of studies and really examining them when they're quantitative in this nature, involving data and a control group. This was not like a truly conditioned study. It's more like Spitz is, just observing things. It's not like he created a true control group by any means. It's more so that he is doing a case study and he's observing what's happening. Because here's the question. We don't know if these children were born with developmental delays. We don't know if they were born with underlying health problems. We don't know if they were born with mental retardation. So there could be a lot going on there. We don't know if, since they were orphans, if, the mothers, indulged in drugs and alcohol during pregnancy, so that if they were born, with low birth weights and had, problems in delivery. There's more to the story is what I'm getting at. But yet again, it's interesting. And it highlighted basically that potential issue of isolation on children. And also, I didn't mention before the developmental test scores from some of the older children in the orphanage. As these children continued to be, ignored, even though they were kind of yearly tested in terms of IQ, we see that their IQ seems to be, or their developmental tests seem to be basically going down rather than up. The lack of, connection that they have with others. Other kind of key studies about feral children, or basically children who have had very little contact with the rest of the world and that were kind of isolated and fortunately, not treated as they should have been. We've got 2 case studies here of Anna and Isabel. And Anna and Isabel have gained a lot of attention over the years through the media because they start kind of with a similar beginning but end with different kind of endings here. And we know that Anna was basically kept alive, meaning that she was fed. We know that she was pretty much tied up. She was kept, to a small little area. And we know that she did not have any kind of contact, with her parents. If she tried to make any kind of sounds, she was beaten. So she basically was tied up. So we're talking about no physical movement. She's isolated from the rest of the world. People didn't know that she existed. She was basically bound and gagged, so to speak, if she was ever making any kind of noise or complaints. Not that she learned to talk, but we're talking more about like grunts or sounds or moaning. She was beaten. And so she's found at age 6, okay, that her parents were giving her this intense, physical abuse. And she ends up dying at age 10 and considered with only the abilities of kind of a lower level toddler, meaning that she could walk kind of not steadily. She could, maybe say a couple of sounds and a couple of words, but she couldn't string anything together. She lacked social skills, just like you've seen around like young children. And this is obviously a very sad case where we see that a child who has been isolated their entire life, physically and emotionally abused, even after being found, is not able to recover, did have some underlying health issues related to malnourishment, but basically doesn't thrive and dies by the time they're 10. Now, Isabel, yet again, was another story of a child that, and yet again, when these kids are being isolated, we're talking about mental issues on the parents' part, where they are not wanting to have children, but yet believe that it's wrong to dispose of their children, maybe receiving income from the state if they're on welfare to keep these children. There's usually a lot of issues going on with the parents in terms of perhaps they were mentally or physically abused themselves. The children were born out of wedlock, and so they were, bastard children that they were embarrassed about. They didn't want the neighbors to know that, that they had these children, and so they were physically and emotionally abusing them and controlling them. In the case of Isabel, Isabel was locked up with her mother, and they were locked up in like an attic, and they basically, the mother had her out of wedlock, and now they're basically being punished for having this child. She's found at age 6 again, and she could only kind of crawl around in a very small area, but she was, for the most part, they would put like chains on her and the mother so they couldn't leave. Food was brought to them. They could make grunting sounds. The mother herself had physical and emotional and mental problems as well, but she was basically being punished for having this child out of wedlock and not being married, and the family was embarrassed, the father, the grandfather, and so this was a way to kind of hide away their sins of what was happening in their family and things they were not proud of, and tried to beat them for any kind of noise they made. Now, she has found Isabel at age 6, and after 2 years, she's able to reach the level of her peers. And all sociologists and scientists and psychologists can determine is the fact that she was not alone and that she still could physically snuggle her mother and had that warmth and that comfort, and they could kind of create their own language and communicate with each other. So even though the mother suffered from, language issues and mental retardation, she was still able to give some kind of comfort and affection to the child all these years, that perhaps that's why she was able to survive and to overcome. Because, she lacked, obviously social skills and had been physically, mentally abused, and she didn't necessarily have some of the health issues. But not only is she able to survive, but by the age of 13, Isabel fit in with the rest of her peers. They moved to a new town. She goes to middle school. She kind of, maybe it seems a little bit more isolated, a little quieter, but no different than the other kids in her grade. People don't even know necessarily what happened to her. So they continue to wonder, why does one child never develop and die and another is able to move on? And they continue to think that maybe it's about the isolation, never having that mother in her life, that loving comfort, that contact. Now, our last child to talk about here today is Jeannie, and I've provided like a 12-minute video clip about her. If you want to watch the whole clip, you can. I think it's really interesting. Normally in class, we would watch like a whole 50-minute documentary about Jeannie. The one that I provided was from the Learning Channel a couple years ago. And Jeannie is isolated until age 13. Basically, the father was a psycho. He suffered from mental problems. The mother suffered from mental problems as well. She also had a brother, and the father basically said to the mother and the brother, have no contact with this girl, just bring her food. And otherwise, if you do, then I will beat you both. The mother had cataracts and also some other vision problems, so she couldn't really see. And she was terrified of the husband. So we're talking about physical, emotional abuse going on, plus perhaps some mental retardation with the mother. The brother, honestly, I don't know a ton about his story. I think he was just living in fear. And the father was embarrassed of Jeannie from the time she was born because he thought that she was mentally retarded. And that was kind of the fundamental question. Was she retarded at birth? Did she suffer from developmental, learning disabilities? But he kind of got this into his head that there was something wrong with her. And perhaps that was because of pregnancy and issues that, arose there. But he had this in his mind. And so he locks this girl to a potty chair, and no one is to touch her or talk to her or comfort her or love her or teach her anything. And so she's 13 when they find her, and she can't go to the bathroom. She can't even really walk by herself. You can see the picture there. It's an incredibly sad story, as they call her Jeannie the Wild Child, because she was so isolated. And eventually, when they find Jeannie, the reason they find her is because the father had gone out for groceries, and they talk about this in the video. And the mom tries to make a break for it. She had gone to like a center for the blind to try to get some help. And then people started to inquire about them and, how come we don't even know you have a daughter? And then people realize, how could this girl be 13 and be acting like this and behaving like this? They saw how skinny she was, that she was emaciated, and they basically take this girl into custody. They're trying to arrest the father. He kills himself. and the mom, loses her. And I'm not sure what happens to the son. Like I said, I never know a lot about him. I guess I should learn more. But you guys can, and you can tell me too. She ends up becoming this major focus of different studies. And she ends up in different foster homes. She lives with different psychologists. They study her, and they're trying to figure out, there's this thought process that there's a critical period for language, and that you have to learn basic sounds and language, usually by the age of 7 or 8, or it's impossible. It's why they encourage you to learn foreign languages earlier in life than later, because they say there is this critical period for learning. And she just can't grasp it. She can make different sounds, she can learn different words, but she can't string them together into a true sentence, because language is complicated in terms of different dialects and slang and just verbiage rules that you pick up on at time. And so they continue to wonder, did she just miss this critical period, or did she actually suffer from mental retardation? And it ends up being such a sad story. She never progresses. I mean, she can walk a bit on her own. She can talk, she can communicate, like when she's at her best, but she also really struggles, and probably ends up being, some people say, at the age of a 4-year-old, or maybe a 5, 6, 7-year-old at the most, but she never really kind of is able to grasp things. And then the situation gets worse because the funding runs out that was provided by the government to some of these scientists, and then some of them basically decide they don't want her anymore because they have no more money to research the topic of nature versus nurture and language, and they basically dump her. And they say she's too much trouble to take care of, and we don't want her. And then the situation gets more complicated because her mom sues and tries to get her back and wins at first and then can't take care of her. And so Jeannie ends up basically in a home. And we don't know a lot about where she's at today, but we know she's still alive, living in some kind of institution. And for a while in some of those different homes, she started to get physically abused for having potty accidents. I mean, because she didn't learn to go to the bathroom until she was 13. So she would have like an accident. And they would abuse her because some of these people took her just in because they wanted the money and the fame of having someone famous in their house. And so then she kind of reverted back to her old ways. And so it's really a sad story. But yet again, it makes us wonder about the impact of isolation on children and on your development and on your overall socialization process. So you guys are going to do page 89, numbers 1 and 2, which shouldn't take you long. Write and complete sentences. You're going to go ahead and write at least 5 sentences in response to that Harlow study about how parents should raise their kid. And you're going to write a journal. And if you want to watch that video clip I provided, that'd be great. Have a great day, guys. Later.